The 1950s was all about having a typical life, which included a small ranch-style home, a mother who stayed home to care for children, and a father who left for work each morning. Times have certainly changed. Not only is the family structure more diverse, but growing up in general looks nothing like it used to. So here are 13 things from the 1950s that kids today would never fully understand. Back in the 1950s, it didn't matter if you were a kid or an adult. No one left the house without getting dressed in nice clothes. Men quite often wore a tie and hat around town, while women wore dresses. There was certainly no running to the grocery store in pajamas and slippers like we see today. Even the children were fully dressed in clothes that were designated for school, church, or even play. And for boys, shirts were always tucked in. Now this doesn't mean that people didn't dress casually. It just means that outside of the home, families made sure to take pride in looking their best. When it came to entertainment, families were still turning to the large radio in their living room. Kids would gather in the evenings to catch the newest episode of The Adventures of Ozzie and Harriet, The Lone Ranger, and The Adventures of Superman, among many others. These popular radio programs were also some of the first to be adapted for television. If you were lucky enough to have a TV in the 1950s, you may have been one of the first on your block. At the time, TVs had small black and white screens, but they were still the most amazing thing kids had ever seen up until that point. Rediscover your past by digitizing your family's memories with Legacy Box. Watch until the end of this video to find out more about preserving your legacy, and then visit legacybox.com/recollection. Parents during this time often married right out of high school, around the age of 18, but they still were firm in raising their children. Politeness and manners were often taught from a very young age, and having respect for adults was the most important part. Saying yes ma'am or no sir, looking people in the eye when speaking or being spoke to, and asking to be excused from the dinner table were common ways to show that you had good manners. This was long before cell phones and so-called social media distracted us from simply interacting with the people around us. Growing up, did you go to church on Sunday? For some children in the 1950s, going to church meant attending Sunday mornings, Wednesday evenings, and the occasional church potluck. As the population of the U.S. exploded with the baby boom, so did the numbers of people showing up in the church pews. The 1950s saw a record peak in church attendance, as families across the country made religion a priority. For students enrolled in public schools during the 1950s, expectations were much different than they are today. Graduation rates were much lower, as some young people quit school to begin working as teenagers. This was more prominent in rural areas, but in general, finishing high school was not viewed the same as it is today. Vocations were more of a focus, including automotive, woodshop, or homemaking. Access to higher education was much less, so only a small percentage of students went on to college. But if you did, it was much more affordable, and many graduates would work their way through school, paying as they went. Parents were very cautious when it came to the type of music kids listened to back in the 1950s. The gyrating hips of Elvis Presley and Chuck Berry were just too much, and it set off a moral panic in suburbs everywhere. The big band era had officially come to an end, as radio stations pumped out what some called the devil's music, but teenagers couldn't get enough of it. Meanwhile, parents did everything they could to prevent the kids from hearing, watching, or God forbid, dancing to rock and roll music. What they thought might be a passing fad evolved into the explicit lyrics and provocative performances that fill the world of music today. Children used to keep busy while they were inside the house, not by staring at phones or tablets, but by breaking out a board game like Monopoly, Mousetrap, or the Game of Life. Playing board games was also a family activity, and some would have a dedicated night to playing games together. Just think, you could buy a Parker Brothers or Milton Bradley board game for less than $2 back then. Plus, it spurred some good conversations and laughs in the process. While outside, kids came up with imaginative ways to pass the time. There were very few organized sports during this time, so the kids came up with their own ways to control outside games. They decided what, where, and when to play the games. They would then choose the captains, who in turn divided up the teams. Today's kids are inundated with organized sports that are often micromanaged by well-intentioned adults. But in the 1950s, it was less about becoming the very best ball player and more about having fun and developing friendships. And it was never about earning a trophy, especially just for participating like so many organizations do today. If you did have a new TV in the 1950s, one show that pretty much all the kids watched was the Howdy Doody Show. The show, produced by NBC, was a pioneer in children's programming and used puppets along with human characters like Buffalo Bob and Clarabelle the Clown. The show also featured a peanut gallery full of in-studio children watching live. As the show's intro, "It's Howdy Doody Time" began to play, all the kids would come running into the living room to watch. The show was so popular, Howdy Doody was a familiar face on merchandise and as a spokesperson in advertisements for show sponsors. During the mid-1950s, the computer revolution began, but not in the way kids today would recognize. Computers at this time filled an entire room and cost more than $15,000 per month just to rent, so only the largest companies in the US utilized them. They were mainly used for complex calculations and scientific functions only, and you might be surprised to learn that they only had memory capacity of about 10 kilobytes. That's equivalent to sending one email today. On Wednesday evenings, The Wonderful World of Disney was what everyone looked forward to. The anthology series was actually called Walt Disney's Disneyland in the 1950s, before it became The Wonderful World of Disney in the 1960s. This was a time when households were limited in choices of TV programming, but the Walt Disney hosted weekly special had families gathering around the TV to watch the likes of Davy Crockett and Johnny Tremaine. Many of these early TV movies were aired in segments over multiple weeks, and it gave the kids something to bond over at school. The coonskin cap craze was a result of the popularity of these weekly Disney TV movies. Before people would hop on an airplane to fly away on vacation, families were hitting the open road. The family road trip was made possible because the interstate system began to take shape during the 1950s, and traveling from state to state became much easier. In addition, gas stations, restaurants, and motels began to pop up along popular routes. Chains like Holiday Inn, Howard Johnson's, and Stuckey's became popular roadside stops as people traveled to vacation destinations, like down to Florida. Packing up the family car was always memorable, and the anticipation would always build after you spent a couple days on the road. There were always lots of great memories made on these family trips. Let me know in the comments if I missed anything, and make sure to sign up for the Recollection Road newsletter using the link in the description. Recollection Road and Legacy Box both believe it's important to preserve the past. If you're like me, there's a box of your family's treasured home movies and photos tucked away somewhere, and Legacy Box can help you preserve them digitally. The process is a simple and safe solution for converting your home movies and photos to thumb drive or to the cloud. Just send in your Legacy Box filled with old VHS and camcorder tapes, film reels, and pictures, and get back digital copies that can be easily enjoyed, shared, and kept organized. It's that easy. Legacy Box is trusted by over 1 million people, and it's all done right here in the USA. Get started preserving your past today. Go to legacybox.com/recollection to get an incredible 55% off. Buy today to take advantage of this exclusive offer and send in your memories when you're ready. Go to legacybox.com/recollection to save 55% while supplies last. If you enjoyed this video, consider watching the other videos in this series. While you're at it, hit subscribe and share Recollection Road with someone you know. As always, thank you so much for watching.